Chapter 7, School Days. The majorettes, their black and white costumes falling just below the buttocks, twirled and beckoned as the band, 54 clarinetists, 51 flutists, 36 cornetists, 26 trombonists, 25 percussionists, 18 saxophonists, 14 French horn players, 9 baritone players, and 9 tubaists belted out Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. The color guard waved its flags to Barbara Ann. The master of ceremonies made the introductions with the flair of a circus ringmaster, asking the audience to direct its attention, please, to the center ring. Ladies and gentlemen, the very best football team in the state of Texas. From all around came whoops and cheers from the two rows of players at the front in their black jerseys, from the stunningly dressed girls over in the corner with their leather skirts and baton bags and blonde hair that rose to a rounded peak and then fell like the fanned plumes of a peacock, from the clean-cut boys in their pleated pants and stonewashed jeans and short haircuts, from the teachers dressed in black, from the parents who brought along toddler sons in black football uniforms and toddler girls in cheerleader outfits, from the rows of pepettes in their white tea party gloves. The lights went off for a flashlight show, little rings of light twirling around once again like something from the circus. There was a skit in which the Panther mascot moved about, ripping up paper tombstones symbolizing Permian's fallen opponents. The sports director of one of the local network affiliates came forward to give the Superstar of the Week award to the Permian defense, and 12 of the boys in black jerseys coyly swaggered forth out of their metal chairs to accept it, to more wild applause and whistles. The lights dimmed and the players went to find their pepettes so they could put their arms around them for the singing of the Permian alma mater. Up in the bleachers, the rest of the students locked hands. All hail to alma mater, we'll always loyal be. Wherever the future leads, our thoughts will return to thee. On every field of battle, will our banner ever wave. There'll be a glorious victory for Permian High always. The lights went back on. A couple of pepettes stayed around to take down the black and white streamers and black and white balloons arching across the side of the bleachers to the other like a covered bridge, in the beautiful handcrafted posters ringing the walls. It was time to go to school, at least for some students. Understandably heady from the experience of the Friday morning pep rally, Don Billingsley's focus was on the game ahead, not on school. Not all the weekly pep rallies were as rousing as this one had been, but it was always hard to concentrate after them. I don't do much on Fridays, he said as he sauntered off to class in his black jersey with the number 26 on it, and even if he had felt otherwise about it, there wasn't a heck of a lot to do anyway. School was just there for Don, a couple of classes to fill up time that offered virtually no challenge whatever, and he was the first to admit that if he was learning anything his senior year, it was a miracle. His schedule that day included sociology class, in which he watched a video of Geraldo Rivera television special succinctly titled Murder, while munching on fresh-baked cookies that he had been given during the pep rally. As his class instruction that day, he listened to an interview with the noted criminal theorist Charles Manson and heard relatives of crime victims make such intellectually stimulating comments as, "I would like to see him die in the electric chair. He doesn't deserve to live." It included photography, with the class spending the period learning how to feel comfortable in front of a television camera. When it was his turn, Don dutifully rose to the challenge by successfully mouthing the scripted words, "This is Don Billingsley. Headline news next." It included English, where the class spent the first 10 minutes going over the homework assignment for Monday, and the next 45 minutes doing the homework assignment for Monday. It included food science, this particular lesson being on correct menu form, and the question of what one should place first on the menu when writing it out, shrimp cocktail or Jell-O salad. "This is what I do all day," said Billingsley as he grappled with the shrimp cocktail versus Jell-O issue moments before plunging into the far murkier ground of the appropriateness of listing cream of tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwich on the same line. All I do in class is show up. They should make these classes 15 minutes long. Last year in English, I had to work. This year, it's like, teach me something before I go to college. Not all classes were like this, but even in accelerated courses, the classroom at Permian was hardly a hotbed of intellectual give and take. It was not uncommon for teachers at Permian to teach for only a quarter or a third of the period, and then basically let the students do what they wanted as long as they did it quietly. It was also unusual to find teachers who demanded from students their very best, who refused to succumb to the notion that there was no reason to challenge them because they simply didn't care. When there was a novel approach in the classroom, it was geared for a generation indisputably weaned on the fast foods of television and the VCR, not the written word. To get students to learn history, one teacher played a version of Jeopardy! Another teacher in an honors English course, instead of having the students read the Scarlet Letter one year, showed them a video of it. Many teachers felt that no matter how creative they were in the classroom, it wouldn't make a difference anyway. They talked about the devastating erosion in standards, how the students today bore no resemblance to the students of even 10 or 15 years ago, how their preoccupations were with anything but school. It was hard for teachers not to feel depressed by the lack of rudimentary knowledge, like in history class, in which the students were asked to name the president after John F. Kennedy. Several students meekly raised their hands and proffered the name of Harry Truman. None gave the correct answer of Lyndon Johnson, who also happened to have been a native Texan. In 1975, the average SAT score on the combined math and verbal sections at Permian was 963. For the senior class of 88-89, the average combined SAT score was 85 points lower, 878. During the 70s, it had been normal for Permian to have 7 seniors qualify as National Merit semifinalists. In the 88-89 school year, the number dropped to 1, which the superintendent of schools, Hugh Hayes, acknowledged was inexcusable for a school the size of Permian, with a student body that was rooted in the middle class. A year later, with the help of $15,000 in consultants' fees to identify those who might pass the required test, the number went up to 5. Some teachers ascribed to the drop in academic performance to the effects of court-ordered desegregation, as well as rapid increase in the town's Hispanic population. In 8 years, Permian had gone from being a virtually all-white school to one where the proportion of minorities in the student body was about 30%. In hush-hush tones, some teachers blamed the school's woes on the Mexicans, or even on the blacks. Even though the school still very much had the look and feel of a white suburban high school, its parking lot filled with new and shiny cars, the majority of its students dressed in striking outfits. Some teachers blamed the erosion on the effects of the economic downturn in the oil patch, which had dealt Odessa a crippling blow. Some blamed it on the breakdown of the family unit. More and more kids were living with single parents who had to work morning, noon, and night just to make ends meet, and didn't have the time or the inclination to promote the virtue of doing well in school. Some blamed it on parents who seemed much less interested in pushing their kids in the classroom than in football or band or choir. Some blamed it on themselves, acknowledging that the passion they had for teaching 20 years ago had run dry. Some blamed it on recent educational reforms passed in Texas that, instead of making the classroom more stimulating and more creative, had done just the opposite by turning the teacher into a glorified clerk, forced to follow an endless series of rules and procedures. Despite the litany of possible reasons, it was hard not to wonder if the fundamental core of education, the ability of teachers to teach and the ability of kids to learn, had gotten lost. Its problems didn't make Permian a bad school at all, just a very typically American one. "It still amazes me when I give a test in grammar and the kids can do it," said English teacher Elodia Hilliard, with more than a touch of sadness in her voice. "It used to be the other way around. I used to be surprised whenever they didn't know it. Now I'm amazed when they do know it." When Hilliard looked around the classroom, she saw students with no direction, and she wondered if they saw any point in being well-read and intelligent. She listened to parents who, rather than promising to try to motivate their children, made excuses for them. The homework was too hard, or the book they had been assigned had too many cuss words in it. Even when she got them to read, the leap to the conceptual creative thinking seemed as far off as a trip to Jupiter. It almost seemed to her and the other teachers as if the students were scared of it. There was a time when she had unflappable faith in her profession, when she had encouraged the best and brightest to follow in her footsteps and spread the gospel of literature and grammar with evangelical zeal, but not anymore. "I really felt we made a difference," she said one day in her classroom, devoid of the usual corner shrine to mojo, but instead decorated with lovely posters illustrating the meanings of hyperbole, oxymoron, monotony, I can't say that right, and personification. "Now I'm beginning to wonder. I don't know. I'm really uncertain." She bent over backward, not to be negative, but she had a view of students she could not suppress. They like to have cars. They like stereo speakers that are fancy. They like to go skiing. They like to wear good jewelry. In her mind, students seemed in search of only one thing. Having fun is what it's all about. Jane Franks, who had been teaching for 31 years and eagerly counted off the days until her retirement at the end of the year, felt the same way. Today's students had become enigmas to her. They weren't disrespectful, they weren't obnoxious, and they weren't demanding. That it wasn't that they were good kids or bad kids or any kind of kid at all. That would have been much better than what they were now, deadened to themselves and to the world around them. These kids don't take responsibility, or don't know how, she said. Kids used to worry about where they were going to fit into the world. Kids today don't seem to worry if they're going to fit into society because they don't give a hoot. 20 years ago, I was working my kids to death, and now I have to remind my seniors to use capital letters and put periods at the end of sentences. They don't seem to care about their grades. They don't seem to care about each other. They seem to care about having a good time, but don't know how to define good. I don't know what young kids are about. I can't get in their minds. I used to. Like others, Jane Franks looked around for people and things to blame, but sitting in the teacher's lounge one day, her voice soft and weary, she decided the fault might be with herself. A fundamental change had taken place in the classroom. It wasn't a place to learn anymore, but a way station, and maybe she was responsible for that. I'm tired. I think I'm tired of being ineffective. I must not be doing it right because I don't have a sense of satisfaction. I don't have the close friendships with the kids I used to. I used to encourage my good students to be teachers because it was so rewarding. I don't do that anymore. When I first started teaching, I felt, my God, this must be like being a pro ball player, getting paid for something I love. It was where I was supposed to be. If school was boring, Don Billingsley nevertheless did his best to get through it. When the food science teacher made the fatal mistake of asking the class if he knew the meaning of the word condiment, Don immediately answered with, lambskin, sheepskin. All joking aside, Don was becoming something of a food science scholar. He had scored a superb 99 on the fill-in-the-blank worksheet on cakes and frostings, not to mention a 96 on his poultry worksheet. The preparation and service worksheet was coming a little more slowly. He had gotten only a 60, but there seemed little doubt that Don would eventually get a handle on it. And, of course, when the occasion rose to write out a menu for a black-tie dinner party in Odessa, he would know exactly what to do. In English, where one of the blackboard panels had a list of questions about Macbeth and another a reminder to bring a flashlight to the pep rally, Don had uncovered one of the great secrets of the class with the discovery that if he angled his chair in a certain way behind the other students, the teacher could not see him fall asleep. "You like to sleep? This is where I sleep," he said just before he entered the classroom. A worksheet was due that day deciphering the meaning of some lines from Macbeth, and Don was handed a copy of the homework by someone else so he could copy down the answers. The class time was supposed to be spent doing a little crossword puzzle on the play, but Don didn't do much of it, and it didn't seem to matter. The instructor, for her part, believed that the text the students used, Adventures in English Literature, which contained selected works by Shakespeare, Edmund Spenser, and Daniel Defoe, among others, was too hard for them. She also said that they absolutely hated any assignment in which they had to interpret what they had read. If they had to think about anything, make critical judgments and deliberations, the cause was hopeless. The best they could be expected to do was regurgitate. In sociology, Don generously passed around his bag of cookies. He and the other students watched eagerly as accounts of one gruesome murder after another passed over the tiny VCR screen, accompanied by the hushed melodrama of Geraldo Rivera. The teacher gave no instruction the entire period except to applaud the actions of a man who, in broad daylight and at airport, killed a manacled criminal suspect accused of molesting the man's son. Don, of course, was a football player, which gave him special status among his peers regardless of how he performed in class. In the hierarchy of the school, where girls and partying and clothes and fancy cars were as important as academics, being a football player opened doors that other students could only dream of. All the other achievements seemed to pale in the face of it. Eddie Driscoll, a wonderfully articulate student ranked number 2 in his senior class, loved to read and debate and throw out ideas. He stood out in class like a sore thumb. There were some who admired him and others who considered him a pompous windbag. Despite all his academic accomplishments, Eddie himself often wondered what it would be like to sit in those 2 rows at the front of the pep rally each Friday in a brotherhood as supremely elite as the Skull and Bones at Yale or the Porcelain Club at Harvard. Such musings didn't make him resentful of the football players. He liked them. He just felt a little envious. No matter how many books he read, no matter how exquisite his arguments in government class about gun control or the Sandinistas or the death penalty, he never got the latest scoop on who was having the weekend parties. Only the football players were privy to that sacred knowledge. "The football identity is so glorious," he said. "I always wondered what it would have been like if I had been a football player. I think it would be great to be in the limelight and be part of the team, have a geisha girl bring me candy 3 times a day." Roky Pierce, who had graduated from Permian in 1988 and was going out with a starting defensive quarterback, Cody Dean, said there was definitely a mystique in the school about dating a Permian football player. Everybody's into football. Football is the sport. I wouldn't say it's an honor or anything, but it's looked up to. Wow, you're going out with a football player? A Permian football player? Roki had been chosen a Pepette her senior year. Lots were drawn to see which player each Pepette would be assigned to for the season. Some of the players were obnoxious and egotistical, but Roki didn't really mind as long as it was a football player she got and not one of the student trainers. Nobody wants a trainer. You want a football player. She had ended up being assigned to Cody, who was then a junior. At the watermelon feed that year, she hadn't worn his number on her jersey, which angered him. But they hit it off well. I liked him, plus I wanted to be a real good Pepette. I didn't want him to think I was a bad Pepette. I wanted to be a good Pepette. She brought Cody an ice cream cake in the shape of a football from Baskin-Robbins. She baked him cakes and brownies. She got him a black trash can and filled it with popcorn balls. She gave him a towel and pillowcase decorated with the insignia of Mojo in Texas. After several months, they went on a date and started going out steadily. From time to time, the role of Pepette became controversial. A stinging editorial in the school newspaper, the Permian Press, applauded a new rule prohibiting Pepettes from placing candy in players' lockers every Friday. Though losing a tradition, Pepettes have gained much respect, said the editorial. No longer will a member of the personal geisha girl be the personal geisha girl of a player. Instead, she can focus more on the organization's original purpose, boosting morale. And in doing so, she will carry the image of professionalism she deserves for her work bolstering the famous Mojo spirit. But the Pepettes still spent time baking players' cookies and making them signs. Since they could no longer put goodies in the lockers of the players, they just handed the stuff to them instead, or dropped it off at their houses. The role was symptomatic of the role all girls played at Permian. You hate to admit it in this day and time, but a lot of girls are conditioned towards liberal arts courses rather than engineering and science, said Callie Tave, who found herself perpetually buried under a blizzard of forms and recommendation requests since she was the only college counselor for the 700-member senior class. The attitude that girls at Permian seemed to have about themselves was reflected during an economics class one day when Dorothy Fowler, a spirited and marvelous teacher, tried to wake students up to the realities of the world in West Texas where the days of the fat-paying blue-collar job were over. Think about your jobs. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Asked Fowler of a female student. Rich, the student replied. How are you going to achieve that? Marry someone? On the SAT exam, boys who took the test during the 88-89 school year at Permian had a combined average score of 915, 433 verbal, 482 mathematical, 19 points below the national average for boys. Girls had a combined score of 840, 404 verbal, 436 mathematical, 75 points below their male counterparts at Permian and 35 points below the national average for girls. Of the 132 girls who took the test during the 1988-89 school year, there wasn't one who got above a 650 in either the math or verbal portions of the exam. It was very revered to be a Pepette or a cheerleader, said Julie Gardner, who had come to Odessa from a small college town in Montana as a sophomore. It's the closest they can get to being a football player. Gardner found the transition to Permian enormously difficult. She was utterly unprepared for her first pep rally, for all those fanatical cheers, all those arms pumping so frantically up and down, and she found the girls cliquey and obsessed with appearance. At first she dressed up like everyone else, but then she began to reject it. And because she was intelligent, she graduated in Permian in 1986 and went on to become an honors English major at Swarthmore College, she also felt ostracized. It was very important to have a boyfriend and to look a certain way. You couldn't be too smart. You had to act silly or they put you in a category right away. It was the end of your social life if you were an intelligent girl. The pressure to conform was so intense, said Gardner, that she knew girls who privately were quite intelligent and articulate, but were afraid to show it publicly because of the effect it would have on their social lives. Her father, H. Warren Gardner, vice president of the University of Texas of the Permian Basin, a branch of the University of Texas system located in Odessa, believed the disparities in performance between boys and girls were a result of the social hierarchy of the school. Gardner said it was clear to him that girls had to dumb down at Permian, or else run the risk of being excluded from dating and parties because the boys considered them too smart. It's not appropriate for a girl to be intelligent, he concluded. It's not popular to be right. And being a Pepette, despite the restriction making candy off limits to the locker room, still carried status. I hate football players, especially at Permian, said senior Shauna Moody. They're the most egotistical. They think they're God's gift. But for a girl at Permian, the only thing worse than being a Pepette was not being one. Or, as Moody explained her own reasoning for having joined, well, everybody's a Pepette. Cheerleading had a special cachet for girls at Permian as well. Just as the football players walked down the school halls in their game jerseys on Fridays, so did the cheerleaders in their uniforms. There were 5 girls on the cheerleading squad, all of them white, and they had enormous visibility. The most popular of them was Bridget Van Deventer, who had always wanted to be a cheerleader. Everyone knew who Permian was and who Mojo was, and I thought it would be neat to be a Permian cheerleader, said Bridget, who had lived with her grandparents since she was 8. The most wonderful moment of her life, she said, was being crowned homecoming queen, and she had vivid memories of it. Changing from her cheerleading uniform into a black velvet dress, wearing a fantastic spread of mums adorned with little black and white streamers and trinkets in the shape of little footballs that one of the players had given her, dutifully waiting in line with the other finalists at halftime, and then hearing her name called, holding the hand of her best friend as she walked around the oval of the stadium with tears in her eyes, receiving 4 dozen red roses afterward from admirers. Because of her status at school and her friendliness, she had no lack of them. For a while she went out with Brian Chavez, and it was hard not to feel proud when she saw him on the football field. It was neat to say, "That's my boyfriend out there, that's who I'm dating." The time Brian scored a touchdown, I was never so excited. Brian was Hispanic, but that didn't make her uncomfortable. My grandmother says whites are for whites, Hispanics are for Hispanics, blacks are for blacks. I don't think blacks are for whites or whites for blacks. I think Hispanics are fine because they're as close to white as you can get. She had many ambitions for her life. She wanted to go into the medical field. She wanted to be Miss Universe. She wanted to open a dance studio. She wanted to be famous. She wanted to write a book about her life. But for the immediate future, her plans included going to college, the junior college in town, Odessa College. A main reason she was going there was her failure to take the college boards, a requirement for admission at most 4-year schools. Bridget said she had been advised by a teacher at Permian not to take the SAT exam until after the football season because of her myriad duties as a cheerleader. She didn't seem upset about it, and one thing was obvious. Her popularity at school was unrivaled. Not only was she crowned homecoming queen, she was also voted Miss PHS by her classmates. Clearly, she was a role model. "I just want to be known," said Bridget, summing up her hopes in life. "I want everybody to know me, but not in a bad way. My dream is to be known, to be successful, and to help people. I love to help people. I look forward to getting out on my own and trying the world. They say it's a real rat race, and I hope to win it." With his dark, pouty looks, it was hard not to think of Don Billingsley as a movie star when he walked down the halls of Permian, gently fending off female admirers in his black football jersey, except for those 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 who seemed to have a certain special something. The way he talked to them, his head ducked low and the words coming out in a sweet, playful cadence, suggested certain self-recognition of his aura. Sophomore girls fantasized over having him in the same class so they could catch a glimpse of his buttocks in the tight-fitting pair of jeans. He received inquiries about his availability for stripteases. The characterization used by girl after girl to describe him was the same, said with wistfulness of irrepressible infatuation. "He's so fine." Aware of his image as the best-looking guy at Permian and fortunate enough to not have school interfere with the responsibilities that came with such a title, much of his day was spent flirting either silently with his eyes or with his benign naughtiness in the classroom. He might not be learning anything, but school was a blast, and everywhere he looked he was fending off girls. The one who sat behind him in government and wanted a relationship, Don had to explain to her gently but firmly that he didn't do relationships. The one who sat behind him in food science, he went out with her for a while, but it wasn't what he was looking for. And the one who came up to him in the hallway. There was the girl who had been dubbed the book bitch. So desperate was she to ingratiate herself with the football players that she bought one of them a brand new backpack and then offered him $50 to sleep with her. When that didn't work, she offered to bring the books of several of them to class. Dutifully, she waited in the hallway, whereupon Dawn and some others loaded her down with books so she could trudge off to class with them with a slightly chagrined smile on her face, as if she knew that what she was doing was the price you paid for trying to gain the acceptance of the football players when you had blemishes on your face and didn't look like Farrah Fawcett. Don was clearly not motivated to be a scholar. His class rank at Permian going into his senior year was the second lowest of any senior on the football team, 480 out of 720. He reveled in playing the Sean Penn role in his own version of Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but beneath all that was a witty, personable kid. During the fall, he was voted Mr. PHS, an honor that delighted his classmates and stunned the hell out of his teachers and coaches. The non-demanding, lethargic nature of the classes he was in made it difficult to fault his attitude about school. Left to his own devices, he did what any high school senior in America would do. He took advantage of it. Asked what the purpose of school was at Permian, Don had a simple answer. Socializing, he said candidly. That's all senior year is good for. That and playing football. If there was any angst about school, it was over the number of girls who desired to spend at least some part of their lives with him. They were everywhere. Girls in short leather skirts, girls in expensive designer jeans, girls who spent the last 5 minutes of class carefully applying rouge and lipstick to their faces because the teacher had run out of things to say. Their perplexity of it all gnawed at him a great deal more than the meaning of Macbeth, or, as he put in a line probably not inspired by Shakespeare play, "There's so much skin around, it's hard to pick out one." There were other football players who had light schedules. One of his teammates, Jared McDougal, had taken senior English the previous summer so that he wouldn't have to grapple with it during football season. There was something wonderfully soulful about Jared. He was unusually sensitive and spoke with pained and poignant sorrow about the confusion of growing up in a world, in an America that seemed so utterly different from the one that he had spawned the self-made success of his father. His class rank was in the top third, but because of football, Jared wanted as little challenge as possible his senior year. With English out of the way, he was taking government and the electives of sociology, computer math, photography, and food science. "That's why I took all my hard courses my sophomore and junior year, so I wouldn't have to worry about any of that stuff," he said one afternoon after food science, where Billingsley and he had just spent 60 minutes on a worksheet containing 165 fill-in-the-blanks on the uses of a microwave. Maybe that's a bad deal. I don't know. Permian's best and brightest, those ranked in the top 10, reported few demands made of them in the classroom as well. Eddie Driscoll, who would end up attending Oberlin College, said he had never been pushed at Permian and generally had half an hour's worth of homework a night. Scott Crutchfield, another gifted student ranked in the top 10 who would end up going to Duke, said he had 2 or 3 hours of homework a week. "I think I'd probably learn more if I had to do more work. As it is, I still learn a lot, I guess. In general, I don't do a lot." Chapter 7, Part 2. In computer science, Brian Chavez wore faded blue jeans and black Reeboks. The number 85 jersey around his expansive chest nicely matched his earring with the numeral 85 in Boston gold. He had a fleshy face in need of a shave, and his hair looked a little like that of the main character in Eraserhead, high and square on top, like an elevated putting surface. It came as no surprise that he held the Permian record for the bench press with 345 pounds. The way he looked, 5'11" and 215 pounds, the way he loved to hit on a football field, the way the words came so slowly out of his mouth sometimes as if he had a 2x4 stuck in there somewhere, it was hard to think that he had any chance of making it past high school unless he got a football scholarship somewhere. He fit every stereotype of the dumb jock, all of which went to show how absolutely meaningless stereotypes can be. He was a remarkable kid from a remarkable family, inspired by his father, whose own upbringing in the poverty of El Paso couldn't have been much more different. Ranked number 1 in his class at Permian, he moved effortlessly between the world of football and the academic elite. On the field, he was a demon with a streak of nastiness that every coach loved to see in a football player. Off the field, he was quiet, serene, and smart as a whip, his passivity neatly hiding an astounding determination to succeed. "He's 2 different people," Winchell said of him. "He's got a split personality when he puts on that helmet." From computer science, he made his way to honors calculus, where a black balloon from the Friday pep rally floated casually from his knapsack. On the way there, he was handed a note by Bridget that read, "Have fun at lunch, and I either will see you before lunch or after lunch. Okay? Smile. Love you." In calculus, he casually scribbled his answers in a white notebook, an exercise that seemed as mentally strenuous to him as trying to see whether he still remembered the alphabet. While others strained and fretted, he just seemed to glide, and inevitably several classmates gathered around him to watch him produce the right answer. After calculus, it was off to honors physics, and then honors English, and then honors chemistry. These courses came easily to him as well. Part of that had to do with what was asked of him. With the exception of English, he said he almost had no homework. If he wasn't a typical brain filled with anguish and neurosis, he wasn't a typical Permian football player either. He was lucky, but he always knew in the back of his mind that if he failed in football, it didn't really matter anyway. He had become as indoctrinated into the cult of football in Odessa as anyone. After all, it was something he had lived, eaten, and breathed since 7th grade. But as he headed into his senior year, he also realized that he wanted something more. No matter how glorious and exciting the season was, he knew it would come to an end. In his own private way, he found far more inspiration in the classroom than he did on the football field, and nowhere did he seem more determined than English class under the spell of a special teacher named LaRue Moore. She saw in him a metamorphosis his senior year, a fascination with vocabulary and literature, and trying to write essays with perception and clarity. He was striving for something she hadn't quite seen before, and when he told her he was interested in going to Harvard, she joyously encouraged him as much as she could and agreed to read his application essays. It was simply part of her style. Whenever she could, she tried to show students the bountiful world that existed past the corporate limits of Odessa and how they should not be intimidated by it, but eager and confident to become part of it. On 5 different occasions, she and her husband Jim, the former principal of Ector High School before it closed, had taken students to Europe to let them see other cultures, other lands. What she aspired to as a teacher was embodied by a written description she prepared of her senior honors English class for a group of observers. I work not only for the gathering and assimilation of knowledge, but also to teach the fact that one can be brilliant without being arrogant, that great intellectual capacity brings great responsibility, that the quest for knowledge should never supplant the joy of learning, that one with great capacities must learn to be tolerant and appreciate those with lesser or different absolutes, and that these students can compete with any students at any university, any place in the world. A teacher such as LaRue Moore should have been considered a treasure in any town. Her salary, commensurate with her ability and skill and 20 years teaching experience, should have been $50,000 a year. Her department, of which she was the chairman, should have gotten anything it wanted. She herself should have been given every possible encouragement to continue what she was doing. But none of that was the case, of course. After all, she was just the head of the English department, a job that in the scheme of natural selection at Permian ranked well behind football coach and band director, among others. As Moore put it, the Bible says, where your treasure is, that's where your heart is also. She maintained that the school district budgeted more for medical supplies like athletic tape for athletic programs at Permian than it did for teaching materials for the English department, which covered everything except for required textbooks. Aware of how silly that sounded, she challenged the visitor to look it up. She was right. The cost for boys' medical supplies at Permian was $6,750. The cost for teaching materials for the English department was $5,040, which Moore said included supplies, maintenance of the copying machine, and any extra books besides the required texts that she thought it might be important for her students to read. The cost of getting rushed film prints of the Permian football games to the coaches, $6,400, was higher as well, not to mention the $20,000 it cost the charter jet for the Marshall game. During the 1988 season, roughly $70,000 was spent for chartered jets. When it came to the budget, Moore did have a reason to rejoice this particular year. The English department had gotten its first computer. It was used by all 25 teachers to keep grade records and also to create a test bank of the various exams they gave to students. The varsity football program, which had already had a computer, got a new one, an Apple IIGS, to provide even more exhaustive analysis of Permian's offensive and defensive plays, as well as to keep parents up to date on the progress of the off-season weight training program. At the end of the year, the computer would be used to help compile a rather remarkable 82-page document containing a detailed examination of each of the team's 747 defensive plays. Among other things, the document would reveal that Permian used 66 different defensive formations during the year, and that 25.69% of the snaps against it were from the middle hash, 67.74% of which were runs, and 32.26% of which were passes. Moore's salary, with 20 years' experience and a master's degree, was $32,000. By comparison, she noted the salary of Gary Gaines, who served as both football coach and athletic director for Permian, but didn't teach any classes, was $48,000. In addition, he got the free use of a new Taurus sedan each year. Moore didn't object to what the football program had, nor did she object to Gaines' salary. She knew he put in an enormous number of hours during Moore didn't object to what the football program had, nor did she object to Gaines' salary. She knew he put in an enormous number of hours during the football season and that he was under constant pressure to produce a superb football team. If he didn't, he would be fired. She had grown up in West Texas, and it was obvious to her that high school football could galvanize a community and help keep it together. All she wanted was enough emphasis placed on teaching English so that she didn't have to go around pleading with the principal or someone else, or spend hundreds of dollars out of her own pocket to buy works of literature she thought would enlighten her students. I don't mind that it's emphasized, she said of football. I just wish our perspective was turned a little bit. I just wish we could emphasize other things. The thing is, I don't think we should have to go to the booster club to get books. I don't think we should have to beg everyone in our town for materials. But that was the reality, and it seemed unlikely to change. The value of high school football was deeply entrenched. It was the way the community had chosen to express itself. The value of high school English was not entrenched. It did not pack the stands with 20,000 people on a Friday night. It did not evoke any particular feelings of pride one way or another. No one dreamed of being able to write a superb critical analysis of Joyce's Finnegan's Wake from the age of 4 on. LaRue Moore knew that. So did Dorothy Fowler, who fumed to a visitor one day. This community doesn't want academic excellence. It wants a gladiatorial spectacle on a Friday night. As she made that comment, a history class that met a few yards down the hall did not have a teacher. The instructor was an assistant football coach. He was one of the best teachers in the school, dedicated and lively, but because of the legitimate pressures of preparing for a crucial game, he did not have time to go to class. That wasn't to say, however, that the class did not receive a lesson. They learned about American history that day by watching Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid on video. When Hugh Hayes became the new superintendent of the Ector County school system in 1986, he had known exactly what he was getting into. When he interviewed for the job and was given a tour of Odessa, one of the very first sights he was shown was the football stadium. He was also given a look at the enormous sign heralding the team's fantastic achievements in the state playoffs. When he took the job, the only piece of advice he was given by the outgoing superintendent was to never promise anyone Permian season tickets. I felt like not a lot of attention had been paid to academics, he said. That's not to say they had an inferior program. I don't think an effort had been made to capitalize on the potential they had in the kids. Whatever you did in academics, you were going to look pretty good because there wasn't much going on. With the backing of a school board dedicated to making improvements, Hayes went to work to boost academic performance in Odessa. He pushed to improve test scores. He raised the number of honors courses from 5 to 30. He started an advanced placement program and stopped making excuses for poor academic performance on the basis of a child's socioeconomic background. A school district this size, with approximately 26,000 students in all grades, should have 8 to 10 National Merit Scholars a year, not just one, said Hayes. But he also knew there was only so much he could do. As he put it, public schools reflect a community's desires, feelings, and dreams. And nowhere did those dreams unfold more powerfully than they did on the football field. It has put Odessa on the map. It's given them a sense of pride I'm not sure could be achieved any other way. It has created a sense of expectation for the kids that is admirable. I think it has instilled in these kids that go through Permian a real sense of competence. If that sort of confidence and attitude could be transferred into the academic arena, that would be wonderful. I don't see that transfer. The effect of creating those values in an academic setting had been well documented. The most famous example had occurred at Garfield High in Los Angeles, where a teacher named Jamie Escalante had astounding success in turning Hispanic students, most of whom had been labeled delinquent dunces, into some of the finest calculus students in the country. Escalante, whose efforts were chronicled in the film Stand and Deliver, did it by turning his class into an important symbol of status. He did it by accepting nothing but the best from students, by forcing them to sign contracts and to come early to class. In the classroom, he cajoled and badgered and tormented and loved. A mystique built up around the calculus class. If you could make it through there, you had truly accomplished something spectacular, something no one thought you could do, and success bred more success. Soon, almost everybody wanted to prove that he or she had the stuff to master calculus with Escalante. Permian had a program every bit as remarkable, one that tradition and mystique had made an irrepressible symbol everyone coveted, one whose demands were ceaseless, one in which the instructors cajoled and badgered and tormented and loved. It was all a matter of values, of priorities. At Garfield High, the priority was calculus, where a student's mastery could potentially lead to an academic scholarship and a career in computer science or engineering. At Permian, the priority was football, which, beyond the powerful memories and the wonderful joy it created year after year for the town of Odessa, rarely led to scholarships or careers. In the history of the program, only 2 players had gone on to extended careers in the pros. If we prepared our kids academically, as we prepared them for winning the state championship, there is no telling where we would be now, said former school board member Vicky Gomez with typical bluntness. If we prepared them half as hard academically, there is no telling where we would be. But Gomez didn't foresee any great changes. Football reigns and football is king, she said. In Odessa, it's God, country, and mojo football. In his first class of the day, Correlated Language Arts, a class for students at least 2 years below their grade level in English, Booby Miles spent the period working on a short research paper that he called The Wonderful Life of Zebras. He thumbed through various basic encyclopedia entries on the zebra. He ogled at how fast they ran. Damn, they travel 30 miles. And was so captivated by a picture of a zebra giving birth that he showed it to a classmate. Want to see it have a baby, man? By the end of class, Booby produced the following thesis paragraph. Zebras are one of the most unusual animals in the world today. The zebra has many different kinds in its nature. The habitat of the zebra is in wide open plain. Many zebras have various types of relatives. He then went on to Algebra 1, a course that the average college-bound student took in 9th grade and some took in 8th. Because of his status as a special needs student, Booby hadn't taken this course until his senior year. He was having difficulty with it, and his average midway through the fall was 71. After lunch, it was on to creative writing, where Booby spent a few minutes playing with a purple plastic gargoyle-looking monster. He lifted the fingers of the monster so it could pick its nose, and then stuck its own fingers into its mouth. There were 5 minutes of instruction that day. Students spent the remaining 50-odd minutes working on various stories they were writing. They pretty much could do what they wanted. Booby wrote a little and also explained to 2 blonde-haired girls what some rap terms meant, like chillin' to the strength, for example, meant like cool to the max. Booby enjoyed this class. It gave him an unfettered opportunity to express himself, and the teacher didn't expect much from him. His whole purpose in life, she felt, was to be a football player. That's the only thing kids like that have going for them. It's that physical strength, she said. After creative writing, it was off to Booby's favorite class of the day, Biology 1, where just about everyone else was a sophomore. He took a seat in the back row of the room. Except for Booby, the students had their notebooks open, while the rip of an envelope and the shuffling of paper floated from his desk. He was busy reading a mailgram from the University of Nebraska head coach Tom Osborne, wishing him luck on an upcoming game. Okay, phenotype and genotype, said the teacher. There was the sound of another rip as Booby opened yet another letter from the University of Nebraska. The teacher lectured for about 5 minutes, and then it was time to do a worksheet on genetic makeup. Where are your notes from yesterday? She asked Booby. I left 'em, he said with a smile. You didn't leave 'em. I watched you. You didn't take any notes, she shrugged. He smiled some more. While other students casually worked to complete the worksheet, Booby ate some candy and left blank the entire second page, which asked for definitions of certain genetic terms. He leaned against his book bag and poked his pen into the hair of the girl sitting in front of him. She smiled at him as if he were a badgering but endearing little brother, and he laughed. The teacher had the students complete some Punnett squares and then began lecturing again in a straightforward, no-nonsense style. She obviously wanted to teach kids something, but Booby seemed uninterested. After a while, he gathered up his things and left class ahead of time. He was being excused a few minutes early so he wouldn't be a second late for football practice. Off he went down the empty hallways of Permian High School, happy and cheerful, the mailgrams from Nebraska tucked safely away in his knapsack.